seat, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين الحضور الكريم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. My name is Sid Ahmed Ben Rawan. I am Professor of Management at Carson School of Management, University of Minnesota in the US, and I am advising Dubai Police on some of the exponential technology. I've been here for a few months, but I have been traveling around the world for some time. I think it's safe to say that, as Tariq has mentioned nicely, that artificial intelligence is going to be the new normal in the future. And we wanted to start this conversation by looking at one of the most important elements in introducing artificial intelligence in the work of society and the work of government. And that is the predictive analytics capacity of artificial intelligence that will allow you, again, to create an environment in which safety is important, crime is controlled, and more importantly, being able to create an environment for your community that is safe and free of all crime. So I want to start this discussion perhaps with my colleagues here. We have Dr. Isa from Dubai Police, and we have Ryan from Canada. I'll give you probably the mic to tell us a little bit about yourself first. Go ahead, Ryan.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here. I'm in charge of the Crime Analytics Department at Vancouver Police, and within the Canadian context, we're the first police department to adopt artificial intelligence-based predictive analytics within an operational policing environment. So it doesn't follow any private sector development. This was actually a consortium of academics that collaborated to develop this machine learning technology, and we were the first ones in Canada to kind of take the big step forward and embrace that and move forward. And we've a lot of lessons learned in moving forward with that, and we're quite happy with the results. We've had significant reductions in our property crime, in the 20 to 30% reduction sustained month after month, which within the realm of law enforcement, this is literally unheard of.
Very good, thank you so much. I want to move to Ivan, if you could just introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Ivan Christoph. I'm the first guy who did the work on the tallest building in the world, CN Tower, before Burj Khalifa. And one of the interesting things is that as a student at the University of Toronto, even at the beginning of this century, we were talking about trailblazing. For example, the Department of Canadian Defense was asking the University of Waterloo how for their soldiers they can train with trailblazing. They first videotape the situation, and then they give different scenarios. And one of the challenges here in Dubai, in this place, would be aerial high-rise rescue, which we've discussed with Brigadier Al Matrushi when he used to be Dubai Police Rescue Department, is that, as you know, on high-rise buildings, like super high-rise buildings, and especially now with the mega high-rise buildings, the perception for the pilot at 800 to 1K is completely different, because 100 to 200 meters, you can see the trees, you can see the wind. Up there, I've been there, like on top of the mast, it's so small. So that's where artificial intelligence comes in place, because there's so much data, especially if we use 3D imagery to predict what can happen. Also, we have the GPS positioning, and plus there's another element, besides the humanity, the ethics is the divine element we have to take care of. And that's why last year I was on board of a helicopter at 1K just to videotape these things. I would be interested to meet all the people here and open for discussions to see what's a new challenge for AIR, artificial intelligence for rescue. Thanks.
Very good, thank you so much. Dr. Isa, do you mind telling us a little bit about your background and what you do at Dubai Police?
So my name is Isa Basaid. I am a holder of PhD degree in computer engineering from Khalifa University in the UAE. I worked with AI in terms of image processing, let's say. Then I moved to Dubai Police to work on AI initiatives across different departments in Dubai Police and how we envision the AI strategy of Dubai Police.
Very good, thank you so much. So to kick off this discussion, I thought probably I should give you a background on artificial intelligence, why it's important for us to talk about artificial intelligence, and why this word is becoming almost like a buzzword. I picked up this slide, which comes from a study that was conducted a few years ago, which talks about artificial intelligence as the new technology that will change the entire economy. I think Tariq, in his introductory remark, has alluded to that. And the technical word that I want you to get out of this is GPT, which is general purpose technology. AI is becoming the new general purpose technology. What that means, it means it's a technology that will create a disruption in the entire global economy. Similar to electricity, similar to the steamboat, similar to some of these technologies that once we discovered them, everything has changed. So even with that, artificial intelligence, it's going to affect the private sector, it's going to affect the government sector, and it's going also to affect the law enforcement sector. So one of the topics that we work on in the law enforcement is how can you maximize the safer environment in which you live? Would you be able to predict, for instance, based on certain data, based on certain algorithms, based on certain training of your machine learning tools, where, for instance, you can distribute your resources and where you can put? And this is perhaps one of the things that I want to start the discussion with, and I want to start with you, Ryan. What are some of the major trends that you can see in criminal predictive analytics capacity?
One of the drivers that I'm finding that we didn't have as prevalent 5 years ago was just the capacity to analyze large data and big data in the truest sense of the true definition of big data. 5 years ago, the technology really hadn't evolved to a point where you could actually delve into trillions and trillions of records and do pattern analysis and be able to extrapolate from that some sort of meaning that you could then use that in an operational sense. And I think that's literally in the last several years that is transcended, and we're now in a world where the larger the data set, the more accurate your machine learning can be trained on it, and as a result of that, you can get meaningful forecasting. So from a policing perspective, how that has impacted us is now we're in a position where, based on trillions of points of data and being able to run machine learning in a learning cycle on a consistent basis, we're able to forecast crime locations with a very high degree of accuracy. In some cases, we're in the 60 to 80% probability range, which I can tell you 5 years ago when we were first examining this technology, we were lucky if we were getting in the 5 to 8% probability, and that was considered somewhat pivotal. So the advent of big data has changed what the potentiality is. And how that now operates is we can actually deploy preemptively specialized units to interdict crime before they occur. And we're looking at location-based, not person-based, because again, one of the topics that Tariq mentioned this morning was the ethics. And it becomes very complicated when you start looking at identifying individuals and looking at individualized data. But when you're looking at, you can anonymize large data sets, big data, and you can still get very meaningful forecasting on that. And based on that, we now actually deploy our resources preemptively. That gives you efficiency gains, that gives you economies of scale, and there's potentially you can do a lot more with less resourcing. And I think that's where the future lies with this, is just really the economics of it is what net benefit does a corporation or a government sector get from being able to deploy these resources. And if that means you can reduce your workforce by 1% to 2%, that can equate to millions and millions of dollars in your net budget savings.
Very good. Thank you so much, Ryan. Of course, one of the things that we will be talking about in a couple of minutes is how you can manage inside your own organization this digital transformation. When you have your own artificial intelligence application, you also need to get a lot of stuff happening inside your company so you can hit those savings. But let me go back to Dr. Isa. If you could tell us about some of the applications that Dubai Police have been testing or using in terms of deploying or rolling out artificial intelligence.
One of the major initiatives we've announced recently is the Smart Police Station. And a similar aim with the other police departments, I would say that we are targeting under the slogan like no policeman policing. So we try to reduce or better said, that to use our resources more efficiently. And one of them is doing the customer service side. So we moved into the smart police stations where there is no officers inside these police stations, and you can do all your transactions through these smart police stations. This is another channel added to the website and to our smart apps as well. So this is like a third channel, let's say, to the customers, because some of the customers would like also to visit at the end of police station, and this is a channel for them. We've seen more than 7,000 transactions since the establishment of these smart police stations, and I think this is the way forward to providing customer service in terms of policing. And then we can use our valuable resources in other core policing businesses.
Very good. As a matter of fact, I visited a few smart police stations, and if you are not around from the city, you can actually take a look at one that is in City Walk, where basically you can get into this police station and complete all the transactions that you may need if you are seeking police services. So actually, this is one of the most important digital transformation that Dubai Police has gone through. Ivan, I want to go back to you with respect to some of the applications that you see in your own environment, in your company. You come from private sector and you have tested a few solutions. What is the most important solution or application you want to think about?
Well, I would clarify that I'm going back to the volunteer, because being a professional, doing the high-risk extreme work, especially what someone has not done, especially in areas where no one has gone before me, being the first guy, I did the job. One thing you have to know is the high risk is the liability. It got consequence, because when I had to be the first guy who to work above 500 meters, they said, Ivan, by the way, if you drop just one piece of your equipment, they're going to sue for $2 million. Why? Because even if it just drops in front of somebody, it says, oh, I'm scared of heights, and they will sue us. So that's why I like these terms, smart police, intelligent innovation. That's one of my concepts for smart rescue. But when it comes to a legal issue, for example, if they would ask me, why did you make this decision? I couldn't say, oh, I did this, my artificial intelligence personal assistant told me that. No, that's why it's better to meet with the powers that be, to see what they've been. They've been the pillars, they have case studies, and from there to develop new, because when I say new, it's my decision is to do the new kind of, the rescue of the future, the new kinds of rescue. And it's rescue one. One guy can go there because you minimize the risk. For example, the first implementation that I did in Toronto was 2 men, 1 pilot and me. We could replace what the Canadian Air Forces could not do and they were not supposed to do, because in urban environment, they're not supposed to enter unless there is war. That's why they avoid the high-rise buildings, and there's too much danger because we had accidents when 6 people die, it's too large, so I simplified these things. And the other thing is that there's so much information, for example, because you have a new challenge, you have high-altitude suicides. I mean, high altitude on high-rise buildings, on high mountains, they preserve, you know, I want to die like a king, I want to see the whole world in front of me, 8,000 meters above, or on a very iconic building. So that's a new challenge that should be addressed very, very careful. And again, even though my father was a diplomat and he was in the police force, I would expect the experts to say their opinion, because I'll give you an example. In Toronto, there was a high-rise buildings, and on the side of the building, the swing stage was flying. So the fire department goes, it just across North York, and the fireman says, you know what, I'm not going to let 4 of my guys enter into your premises until it's completely safe. Whoever got these people there, let him get them secure, and then, only then, I will go there. So that's why you have to look not just the history in the future, but
what's the legal ethics. And because ethics is a very, it's a gray area, then you go by case studies and to see the wisdom of the humanity.
Very good. Actually, we're going to go to the ethics part, which will be our last segment in this conversation. But before we get that, I wanted to move to another important aspect. If you are a manager of AI in your own company or your organization, you still have to deal with the fundamental question how you can lead change inside your organization. It doesn't help that you bring a new technology, a new tool, and you dump it on your company. It's important for you that you lead that organization from the inside to be able to implement that new technology. And whether you're coming from a private sector, a public sector, or in between, still important that you understand how you can lead a digital transformation strategy. I pulled this website, this slide from McKinsey, which speaks about when it is good for a company to introduce a digital transformation, whether it has to do with big data or it has to do, again, with artificial intelligence. And you see that the pioneers in this study are the companies that have certain ingredients. One of them is the company knows how to deal with data governance. You won't be able to launch or to roll out a strategic initiative with respect to AI if you don't have data or your company doesn't understand how to deal with data. Number two, you are able, in fact, to change and to transform current product into product that you would want to launch in the product. So change, the internal change, is very important. I want to go back to my panelists, and I want to get their perspective on how they implemented AI initiatives inside their organization. So Ryan, can you tell us or share with us some of your ideas?
One of the biggest challenges, law enforcement, as my fellow panelists will agree with, are notoriously conservative. And in many cases, technology adverse in some respects. And one of the things that was mentioned right at the beginning of the keynote this morning was the concept of trust. And within law enforcement, using predictive analytics, it's very difficult for law enforcement officers to give up decision-making power, similar to that lady driving the car there, give up their decision-making and autonomy and relegate it to some technology that now informs them of where they should go. Because in many cases, you have to understand this from a law enforcement perspective. If I've been a police officer 25 years, why is the machine going to tell me how to do my job better than my 25 years of experience? And that was one of the largest challenges that we had at the Vancouver Police. Population of Metro Vancouver is about 2.6 million people, fairly large metropolitan police deployments within the city of Vancouver, and change management and technology adoption was one of our biggest challenges. The technology was one issue in terms of adopting it and building the infrastructure, but I would argue that the larger challenge was actually organizational acceptance and managing the change management practices on how police officers now conduct their day-to-day activities. So some of the things that we did to try and hedge against that and facilitate organizational acceptance, we tried to mitigate the machine learning having a dictatorial component. So we had looked at some previous rollouts in the United States where they had put out predictive analytics in terms of forecasting crime. And they would tell the police officers, you must go here. You must go here and sit there for 2 hours. And from a policing perspective, police hate that. They just hate that because they want to be able to tell themselves where to go. So how we adopted that and changed that was in our deployment, all police cars have what's called a mobile terminal. It's a Panasonic Toughbooks that are cellular connected. We would now deploy the visual representation, a UI, on the mobile terminals, and we'd give little warnings and alerts to the officer saying, there's a very high probability within your zone of responsibility that there's a higher degree of probability that there's going to be a particular crime occurrence happening. But we left the decision-making and autonomy with the officers themselves as part of the bridging. Other things we did was during our pilot, when we did a validation and proof of concept, is we rotated as many officers through the pilot project as possible so that they could have hands-on knowledge and actually see how accurate the system was firsthand as it was being tested. So they'd have firsthand experience with it, as opposed to having this system imposed on them. And that was really one of the bigger challenges organizationally in the adoption of the technology.
Very good, thank you so much. These are very good examples. I want to actually get your take, Dr. Isa. When you rolled out the SPS, the Smart Police Station, it's basically what you are doing. You're replacing a classical, traditional police station, which probably will cost you anywhere between $5 to $6 million, and you're replacing it with one booth, which has all the facilities that will cost you probably less than that. But I am sure that that's not easy for a traditional police officer or traditional police station basically to accept that change. You must have done something internally to manage that change. What was that?
We had like, there are two parts in the equation, let's say. There's one part related to the customer. So maybe people would still go to a conventional police station and then you have them useless effectively. The other way is the internal change, where you convince your people that this is the way forward, and then you have to take it from there. One of the things is that you have the CEO with you. As IT department, if the CEO is supportive, he sees the benefits, he sees all these things, and then you have a pilot that you can test and try, then people would see a benefit eventually. I'd like to bring two examples. One of them is the credit card. When the first time you could use your credit card on a website, people were reluctant. They still like the ATM machine. They want to withdraw money and then pay for the service or the item. They were very reluctant. If I use it on a website, still my father does, so he doesn't like to use his credit card on any website. He let me do it and take the risk. So eventually people will trust the new technology and see the differences in experience and service, and then they would use it more and more often. The same thing, I was speaking to one of my professors, and he said, you remember the way we started using Google Maps? First, we didn't trust Google Maps. We said, no, we know the road better, and we know the route better. We'd use the same route. Google knows nothing. Then you stuck in traffic for the first time. Second time, you are reluctant. Third time, you go blindly follow the Google Maps. And the same thing will go with technology and digital transformation, I think, in most of the organizations. When they see the benefit, they would follow the route.
Very good. I liked actually your discussion because you mentioned two important factors in any digital transformation, customers and leadership. I'll start with leadership first. Leadership is about leading, providing the vision for the organization. And if leadership is with you, most likely you will succeed. But if leadership is not with you, most likely you will not get anywhere. But also you have to talk to your customers and you have to understand whether customers are coming or not. And I want to go back to you, Ivan. If you look at your own company, how did your customers dealt with the technology that you have implemented? What was the things that you have done to make it acceptable to them?
Well, I wasn't concerned about that. I came with innovation. I said, let me handle the things, for example, and I think that was the right way because I was the very first to use the we didn't have smartphones then, digital cameras to videotape everything because I give you a case study. What happens is that they hire a company, they do the job, they don't fix it. They hire a second company, do the job, they didn't finish the job. The third, and how I made reputation, I just went there with the cameras, with the equipment, finished the job, said, here's your problem. Say, oh my God, we should have hired you in the very first thing. So you don't wait for them. I just go with innovation. But when it comes to AI for law enforcement, I come into a different world. That's why speaking of innovation leadership, being at the forefront, is there's one missing part that hasn't been discussed so far, and that's the religion. Because right now here we have different religions, so there's different meaning of pro-life, pro-choice. In North America, in both sides think they believe they're right, pro-life or pro-choice. So in rescue, you have to deal with new ethics.
we don't want to play gods. You know, in the medical world, there is this syndrome. So that's why not just artificial intelligence, new technology you can have live actions and make the decision makers, the people who will live with the consequences, what they'll decide. Because if you get to the person that he wants to be, but he doesn't want to be rescued, he wants to end his misery, something like that. How do we do that? You know, we don't want to get the human factor out of the equation. That's where we don't want to get into divine factors. So that's why leadership is how you put it. But you have discussions like here, and at the end of the day, you made the report and you present it, and then that's this part. Then you have to fight to have a proof of concept and why this and why that.
Very good, thank you. I think we have a few minutes left in this panel discussion, and I wanted to end this discussion with this issue that we have been talking about, which is the ethical aspect of decision making, or what we call decision making in AI. I wanted to show you this picture, which comes from a very known philosophical problem that we teach in business schools and in other schools as well, and it's called the trolley problem. The trolley problem is an exercise, and it's an intellectual exercise that you present to your students or to your audience to force them, to challenge them basically to make decisions that probably they don't like or they don't want to make. And in this trolley problem, you have two scenarios. You have one scenario in which you have a train that is going either to kill one person or 5 people. And your choice is basically to change the lever so the train goes either to kill one person or to kill 5 people. You don't have choices. It's either 1 or 5. So that's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is basically you have someone in the bridge that you can push, and when you push that, someone will stop the train, and that train will save the 5 people. When I run this experiment with my students, most of my students would find no difficulties in using the first scenario, which is simply changing the lever. Say, well, you know what? I have to save 5 people, so I'm going to kill 1 person. But when you ask them actually, what about scenario B, where you be pushing the person, basically you are actually you making that decision, then most of students, most of people will be reluctant. Why? Because in the first scenario, you're using technology. The lever is a metaphor for technology. So it's not you who's killing, but it's basically the machine. In the second one, it's you pushing the person, and most of people would find it very, very difficult to make that choice. MIT ran a study just very recently, about 2 months ago, basically taking this scenario of the trolley problem and then asking the question, will a driving machine or driving car make a decision about who to kill? If you have 2 people on the road, is it a grandma or a young kid? Is it an Emirati or an American? Is it a white or a black? Is it an Asian or European? How do you make those decisions when you have this idea of AI? So I want to go back to my panelists. Ryan, I want to start with you with respect to this moral decision. What are some of the issues that you are dealing with in your own implementation of AI that deals with this ethical dilemma?
2 things come to mind. The first one is, before you adopt AI, you really have to ask the question, should you be adopting AI in the first place? Is there an intrinsic value that is morally based in your decision to adopt AI? So do you get, and I kind of distill it down to something really as simple as, do you get the creepy factor? Are you doing something that, when you look at it, makes you feel uneasy and makes you, that's a bit creepy, and I wouldn't want machine learning to be able to do that, and I'm not sure if I don't feel at ease with that, the general public would definitely not feel at ease to it. That's one component, but kind of delving deeper into it, the issue I'm finding with big data in itself and our capacity to now data mine that and run through, you know, very advanced algorithms that do pattern analysis is there's 2 issues. One is the ethics of the machine learning itself. Does it have any capacity to identify bias within the data? Is the data in any way, especially, and this is specific to law enforcement, is there racially or prejudicially based decision-making on the data collection that is now being ingested by the machine learning. And by doing that, it becomes a self-fulfilling, replicating bias, and potentially racial or socioeconomic decisions are being reinforced by the machine learning. So for example, one of the arguments, Los Angeles police experimented with crime forecasting, and they now have the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, which is a very powerful grassroots civil-based resistance to the use of machine learning. And their perceptions of the use of AI and is that the police officers are over-policing certain marginalized communities. And by doing that, they're doing more data collection. If there's a white community or a Hispanic community, they're making decisions before the implementation of AI to go predominantly in the Hispanic or black communities. And because of that, they're collecting more data on those communities. And because of that, that's now being fed into the machine learning. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that the machine learning now reinforces that data bias, and we now tells the officers, you should be going to this community. And the perception is from a law enforcement, they say, well, it's machine learning, it's scientific, it's ethically neutral, so it's perfectly fine. There's no prejudice or racism in the decision making. It's scientific, it must be valid. But it loses sight of there's always a human element to the creation of the data. It's based on our interactions, our decision making. And I think that gets lost in many respects.
Thank you so much. That's actually an important element. So a good AI is good only as far as the data that you are inputting into that AI. The algorithm by itself doesn't do anything. The algorithm simply plays with what you give it in terms of data. So you provide bad data, you get bad results. You provide good data, you get good results. And that's, it seems to me, what's missing in this conversation about AI. As if we're thinking about AI in terms of magical terms, forgetting that AI, it's simply about statistics. It's simply about probabilities. What is my probability that in this region a building will collapse? What is my probability that in this area an event will happen? And those probabilities are primarily based on the data that I have. We used to tell and to teach our students the following formula. That was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Previous performance is your best indicator of future performance. If you are trying to hire someone and you don't know that someone, so what you're going to do, you're going to simply look at their previous performance, and that would give you a good indicator of their future performance. That's exactly what we are doing with data. So you give me previous historical data, and then I will tell you what will happen in the future. But if you give me bad data, most likely I am going to give you bad results. The problem is that the person who's behind those choices will tell you, you know what, oh no, that's an AI decision. That's a machine learning decision, as if machine learning makes decision by itself, and that's, I think, the wrong idea. So I'll go back to Dr. Issa. What are some of the things that you are doing at Dubai Police to make sure that those moral questions, those ethical questions are being asked before rolling out a new technology?
In Dubai Police and in Dubai government, we were ahead, I think, in the ethical implications of AI. The Dubai Data Initiative published a set of rules or ethical on how to implement ethically AI in different organizations. It is now as a guideline for government agencies to go through this questionnaire, let's say, or survey, to measure how ethical their AI applications are. And the next step is to have a law, because we are at the end a law enforcement agency. So whatever if you think in law enforcement you use AI, what about private companies? What about other players in the market? They should follow the same rule. It's government, private sector, everyone is involved, and they should take ethical consideration when they roll out AI applications. So the ethical AI law should be released and approved. And I think the Elon Musk and others asked for a global AI law, where to apply and where not to apply. applying AI in wars, in civil areas, etc. So we are lacking that legal framework, so everyone would know where he stands or she stands, on which side of the law at the end.
Very good. I think that's also one of the serious challenges that we face as a community. I had a chance and the honor to be at the World Government Summit about a month ago, a few weeks ago, and we had this discussion with respect to ethical AI, and there is an international group actually led by the Ministry of Artificial Intelligence in the UAE that is actually thinking critically about the ethical and the moral framework. Of course, legislation is very important. The legal framework is very, very important. But beyond the legal and beyond the legislative environment, you still have to train people on how you can make those choices and those tough choices. Ivan, what's your experience with respect to these moral decisions when it comes to implementing your own technology?
Well, besides reading the Bible, because I'm Bulgarian Canadian, that's one of religion, I like this A and B dilemma, because if you switch the question, who would rather save? It's much easier, the baby. Now, this dilemma in the medical aspect, as a father of 2 kids, has been, okay, if the woman has a birth and the doctor must make a decision, either the mother or the children. In our religion, it's the mother. But there's another religion, another country, because that's where, not just what kind of data you put, is, oh no, the mother has already lived her life. The priority is, number one, is the new life, the baby. So that's, especially in the Bible, it starts with, it first was the word. So that's why it's easier for the location. But then comes the ethical, what you have to do with multicultural countries, what you have to do with another situation, and that again comes to the legal aspect that follows them, and you rely on the law.
Very good. I'm glad that you mentioned the religious reference, because again, as a community, as a human race, a lot of our values come from that first upbringing with respect to religion, whether it's Christianity or Islam. I wanted to end up this segment with this slide, which actually speaks to the hype with respect to AI. Is AI going to destroy all our jobs? Are we going to be faced with a situation in which our skills will no longer be valid? I was happy to find this study that comes from Accenture in 2018, in which they ask the very basic questions: what are the type of skills that you needed to have in order to prepare for the next generation of technologies? In other words, what would you need to have in terms of competencies and skills as we move from one type of technology industry to a new type of technology? And what they did in this study, they basically simply divided, if you will, the skills or the competencies that you need. So there are certain competencies that a human will be always good at in terms of leading, improving, judging, creating. And there are certain skills that technology will be always good at in terms of iteration, mechanics, automation, and so forth. So I'll go back to my panels, and I want to start with Ryan. What are some of the questions that you have to ask yourself when you rolled out artificial intelligence in terms of labor market issues? Were there any resistance from people saying, you know what, I don't want this technology because I don't want to lose my job, because eventually, if you keep implementing this, I will not be on the streets?
I think there's some validity to those concerns in terms of very specific, if this is your job and technology is in some way usurping it, there is some risk for that. But I think if you take a step back from that and look at the larger context, I kind of equate this to, I remember many, many years ago when we adopted, we were a paper-based police organization 20 years ago, and we went from completely paper-based, where we needed transcription, to mobile terminal-based. Everything was completely paperless and electronic. And we were, again, one of the first agencies in Canada to go in that direction. And we had a small army of clerks that would transcribe all the paper-based reports from police officers and put it into a small database system. Back then, they were small by modern standards. And we'd have hundreds of these people that would transcribe our written notes as we arrest somebody and charge somebody and report to prosecutors, all those things. We had hundreds of those people. When we went to our paper-based system, they let all those people go because we now have an efficient electronic base. The officers now input all our reports. And we thought we're going to save hundreds, millions of dollars in staffing because we've now eliminated these hundreds of clerks that their sole job was doing that. That lasted about 2 months. And then we realized the officers putting in the reports, there was no checks and balances and quality control in what they were doing, and there was no oversight. There was no what we call readers that would make sure that the officers were coding things properly. And there was no pushback to the police officers in terms of accountability on how they were entering in the reports. So what we then had to do is hire back another couple hundred people that we had just let go and give them a new job. And their new job had nothing to do with transcribing. It was now all QC and coding and reading and ensuring that the officers were doing what they were supposed to be doing in terms of their entry. So yes and no. Like, did people lose jobs? Yes. Did we create new jobs with the new technology? Yes. And I see the exact same thing happening with artificial intelligence. It's a transformation in the jobs. We're not removing jobs by creating greater efficiencies, but people will be employed in a different way.
Very good, and that's actually the point that most of people would make, is that you need to retrain, retool your labor force in order to be able to make them ready for this big digital transformation that we are looking at. I think we're very close to the end of our panel. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes if you can think of any question. We want this panel to be as interactive as possible. We have time for 2 or 3 questions, so if you have questions, please go ahead. I will ask you to introduce yourself and be as brief as possible so we can take advantage of your question. Yes, ma'am.
Salam. My name is Banu. I'm the co-chairwoman of PPW Middle East, and I just wanted to ask Mr. Essa, you were saying how the change with Google Map, that was an amazing example. I was being stubborn to Google Map a couple of days ago, then I said, I'll follow what you say. I just want to ask, especially in Dubai, with the Muslim country, how about the Sharia law implementation to an AI? I mean, how this, we're talking about ethics and all of this stuff, but as Muslims, we have different perspectives. So these kind of things, because in police world, as far as I know, there is conventional law and Sharia law. How do you think it will be implemented?
I'll take the answer because we had a very interesting discussion in the World Government Summit about this question, and that's where the weakness of the legal and legislative system that we have in most of countries, not only in here. So that's what Dr. Issa was saying, is that you cannot implement AI unless you have a clarity about the legal and the legislative environment that you are dealing with. And these are the questions that perhaps will be addressed by legislator as well, which is what is part of the modern law and what is part of the Sharia law. So these are the questions, the real questions, and they are not easy questions. I think the challenge is that technology is moving very, very fast, and our traditional government structures are by definition slow because they have to study, they have to make decisions, they have to make choices, and that's perhaps where the discussion is. Next question, please. Yes, sir. The back. Oh, yes, sir. Yeah.
Invest in early stage disruptive and exponential technologies. And I saw your slide about the trolley problem, the MIT case study. But I'm a mathematician by training, and one of the things that comes to my mind is that you talk about 2 variables, the A and B, the child. But I see 3 variables in that picture, the car. Would it not make sense to actually, in order to mitigate this dilemma, and of course it's a loss of life, whether it's a child or an adult, is to be prevented at all costs, would it not make sense to actually take that data, which you're capturing from the sensors, I presume, on the car, and study the different scenarios out there, and ask the manufacturers to make sure that there's an early warning that flags in the car when you see such scenarios out there, to mitigate those responses. Because you can't help it if you have that choice, but you can absolutely control what you're doing with the car. So I see that thing should be brought up in that conversation.
I 100% agree with you, and that's the responsibility of tech companies. If there is, again, a legislative and a legal framework that would expect that from the manufacturer and the tech company, that would be also part of the discussion. Because actually, before AI makes the final decision, there is already something on which I can. Do you have any answer to some of these questions?
I can
Yes.
just add, what you're talking about is transformation of liability. Or do I make a decision and go with that, or the manufacturer? In Canada, that's usually, it's the manufacturer, because if he has to be sued, he has the more money. I'll give an example. Drives a car, and one is at fault. The one at fault hits a telephone booth. Who do you think the company, the lawyers will try to sue? The telephone company. Why? Because they have more money.
No, I appreciate that. But
That's in Canada. That's why that's in Canada. That's
Very good.
Yes.
Nice conversation. This is actually what we want to do. We want to carry on that conversation during the network. So that's why we interject in this. I'm going to take a final question from Nasser, please.
Nasser from... Hello, yeah. Nasser from Petroleum Development of Oman. So I'm a bit in a different... I would like to hear from you is we push so much on technology, especially when we roll out this technology into the organization. One of the areas was sustainability. Can you touch base a bit of on human capital management, the people development, the capability building, and how we sustain it when we embed this type of solution? Because I hear a lot of things, you know, especially Dr. Sachin is nearby me. We talk about data science, we talk about machine learning, and so forth and so on and so forth. So people is the key.
Yes, I totally agree with you, and thank you so much, Mr. Nasser, for bringing this up. And that was actually one of the things that we talked about. What makes your technology successful? One, you will not be able to build simply your success based on the implementation of technology. There is a whole series of things that happens in the, using your own language, upstream. And the upstream is basically the people development, is the training, is the change, is the mindset, is the value system that has to happen inside the company before actually you roll out. So there is a lot of change and a lot of things that needs to be happen before even you implement the technology. I think I ran out of my time, so I wanted to thank you so much for being interactive with this panel. I want also to thank all my friends here in the panel, and thank you for great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.